Hello, everyone. I hope you are doing well. So, a screencast was not listed as something for you to listen to for this week. So, this is not a screencast of new information, but rather it's a response or a review of some of the themes that I heard with your forum posts from this last week. And so, I wanted to highlight some of the common themes. Hopefully, I touch upon the different issues or topics that were of concern to people. And if I do not address yours specifically, please reach out to me. I'll talk more about that at the end here. So, one of the themes that was brought up, somebody had mentioned a forest plot, wanting to do something like that. A statistical analysis is not required for your systematic review or for your scoping review. And typically, only the systematic reviews would have a uh, statistical component, that meta-analysis. So that's ultimately up to you and your committee. And if your committee has experience in that area, great. If they don't, that might be a little bit more challenging for you all to do. Your results section. This was an area where people talk about having a struggle with what to write. And just kind of taking a step back again, remember in your introduction section, you are defining the problem and you're having a purpose statement. The purpose of this systematic review is to, the purpose of this scoping review is to. And then your method section is describing for the reader how you identified articles that go into your systematic review and your scoping review. It's basically the procedure or the recipe that somebody could follow to find the same articles that you found. So now in your results, what do? Well, as I looked at your Prisma figures, many of you were in that 8 to 10 range. Some people had a little bit more. And in the results, as you've seen with many of the articles, they may only have 3 or 4 paragraphs. So here, depending upon the number of articles you have, you're going to either highlight the key findings of each study or summarize the key findings from comparable studies. To throw out an example of what number 2 might look like, maybe you had randomized controlled trials that were performed for a short follow-up period of 3 months. You might highlight that there appeared to be effectiveness of the intervention in comparison to the control group. And so you could talk about and summarize those studies within a paragraph, noting something like 4 randomized controlled trials have investigated X, Y, and Z versus X, Y, and Z with short follow-up periods of 2 to 3 months. In each of the studies, the populations had similar demographics, and then list those demographics. Subjects in the experimental group would receive the treatment and kind of define that. Those in the control group might receive treatment A, treatment B, treatment C, and then ultimately say something to the effect summarizing that those individuals who received the experiment group had significantly better outcomes in X, Y, or Z compared to the control interventions within a 3-month time period. You could then have another paragraph that maybe followed the individuals over 6 months or a longer period of time. And maybe the results there were different. Maybe in the long run, it wasn't as effective or there was no difference. So what I'm trying to highlight here is there are similarities, there are themes. A lot of those things could be based around the type of intervention, the populations, the outcome time periods. Those can help you kind of put these into paragraphs, because you might be feeling to yourself, gosh, I've got 10 studies, and if I write a paragraph on each one, that's going to be a lot longer than what I see in a typical systematic review or scoping review. And that's true. You don't want to do that. And the nice thing is, and you'll see this in the next slide or two, you can call out to the table. The table is going to summarize each of those papers too. Your reader of your systematic review or scoping review isn't interested in reading all of those papers. They're interested in your presentation of each of those papers. So your systematic review or your scoping review is like a Reader's Digest, a Cliff Notes, a tweet of all the papers combined together. Now, if you're doing a scoping review, you may have several paragraphs related to different themes. And I highlight this on an upcoming slide, but for example, let's say diet, you could have like this new diet and its effect on weight loss, and that could be a paragraph where you then summarize the findings. You could have the diet and its effect on blood pressure, and you could have the diet and its effect on mood or mental health. So some of you I know are doing a scoping review. You may have 2 or more kind of themes or areas of interest. You don't do that with the systematic review. The systematic review is very precise on one thing. Again, in your results, you're going to have tables. Now, I should rephrase this here. Let me type this in here. Something like number 1 and number 2 would be in the methods section, and number 3 would be in the results section. So your Prisma and your table of keywords and articles identified, the number of articles, those would be something that would be called out and fit into your methods section. The table per topic of analysis, that would be in your results. And as I mentioned before, when doing a systematic review, you might only have one table. If you're doing a scoping review, you might have 2+, depending upon how many themes you're exploring. And table format, I think there were some questions about that, what that might look like. Again, go to the articles that we've had throughout the term. Those can be a good example. Typically, there's the author and year. So that way somebody could go, hey, I want to look that article up. They could look it up if they wanted to because they know it's Smith et al. 2018. You're defining then the subjects, what intervention was done in each group, the outcome measures in the follow-up period, and then the outcome results. Question about bias assessment, if you should include those or not, and you are definitely welcome to do so, and it may help your discussion section. So if you included the results bias assessment table, you would probably want to have a table and also a paragraph related to that. Then in the discussion section, you would interpret the scores and how that impacts the research or the potential value of that research. Somebody was talking about comparing apples and oranges. They have several randomized control trials, but they are different from each other. We see this in physical therapy all the time. And I guess that reflects the diversity in practice and thought. So, for example, I want to know if manipulating the spine is effective at reducing low back pain in people with acute low back pain. Well, you might simply have a study where somebody receives a manipulation in the acute time period, and somebody else gets a sham manipulation. So they get put into the manipulation position, but the high velocity, low amplitude thrust is not applied. Well, that shows manipulation. Is it effective or not? You might find another study which reports the use of manipulation as being effective, but they, before doing the manipulation, also utilized ultrasound and massage to help, quote, relax the muscles. And maybe a third study had manipulation and the use of a hot pack and the use of exercise versus a control group. Now, it'd be great if it was manipulation, hot pack, exercise versus manipulation alone, but a lot of times we don't see that. So let's say each of the manipulation studies showed that manipulation was effective. Well, can we say for sure in 2 of the studies that manipulation was the key thing, or was it the multimodal approach? And that's where in the results section, you are describing what occurred. But in the discussion section, you're giving context. And so what I might say in the discussion section is there were 10 studies included in this analysis, with only 2 of the studies performing a single intervention versus the control. In those 2 studies, the use of manipulation was blah, blah, blah. In the remaining 8 out of 10 studies, they used a multimodal approach, and those in the multimodal approach had significantly better reductions in pain. Now I would want to discuss, okay, what is known here? Well, manipulation seems to be effective. Is manipulation more effective alone, or is a multimodal approach? And I can highlight that we don't know the answer to that. I could discuss something about cost. I could, if I had the time, explore the meaningful clinical difference scores if those were reported. I could report effect sizes and draw some inferences that way. Some of those things you may not have background in, that's okay. What you're looking at here, or what you could look at here in the case of the manipulation, is you could be discussing that manipulation, either alone or as part of a multimodal approach, appears to be effective at reducing pain in individuals with acute low back pain. Future research is necessary to determine blah, 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 if manipulation alone is more effective. Why is that important? Well, cost. Every time we apply something to a patient, we're charging them and their insurance company. Or is the use of manipulation with hot packs or ultrasound or massage, does that make the manipulation more effective? Meaning, are we successfully getting a cavitation? Are we reducing the total time it takes for somebody to get to an acceptable pain level? So that meaningful clinical difference. Now, I know that manipulation is not your background area, and that's okay, but hopefully what you're getting an idea on is seeing how, all right, what's important for the patient, and how do these studies demonstrate that or not? So that's how you can compare your apples and oranges. You talk about it in the results section, and then you discuss it in detail in the discussion section. And you look at it in the context of how does it affect the patient in the short term? How does it affect them in the long term? What is not known about the topic, what needs to be known, etc., etc. Now, discussion conclusion section, there was people discussing how do I avoid bias? I have bias. Just be conservative with your conclusions. So lean on the findings. Like in my previous example there with manipulation, I could have said manipulation is effective, period. Manipulation is the key thing that helps people get better. But if I did that, I might not look for those nuances. So if I go back and look at those manipulation studies that was manipulation only compared to a control group, well, what if those individuals, it took them 2 weeks to get their pain down to a 0 out of 10 on a visual analog scale, whereas the multimodal group, they got better faster. They got better in 1 week. I can draw conclusions there, and I would suggest then that manipulation was effective individually or as part of a multimodal approach. And it appears that the multimodal approach may help to reduce pain faster. However, a randomized control trial consisting of X and Y is necessary to confirm those findings. So again, avoiding bias by just being as conservative as you can with the analysis of the research results. Now finally here, and this is not an uncommon feeling that people have, you're busy in clinic. Am I doing the right thing? I'm stressed. I get this with the PhD students I work with too. Working with a PhD student now, and he's having a lot of difficulty with some of his writing and getting his proposal defense documents ready to go for his initial proposal defense. If we need to meet, let's meet. I've met with several of your classmates throughout this term. We can email, we can Zoom, we can do things in person. So let's meet if we need to talk about things. Also, rely on your committees. You've gathered your experts. Have them check out sections you've written. Ask them for feedback. Ask them what you might be missing about different things based upon what they know about scoping reviews or systematic reviews. And especially if you have faculty on your committee, they have experience probably writing, and so they'll be able to help you negotiate some of these tough issues. So don't forget to reach out to them. That team is there to support you, to provide guidance, and help you with this process. All right, this week is another week devoted to writing. Have a good one. Stay cool.